I was in Sunday school one day when they wrote the word integrity on a chalkboard. And they said, "Now, what does integrity mean to you?" And they pointed to me, and I blurted out, "Cake." Integrity to me is pound cake.
Onions were pink, beer is blue, so peas are purple.
Like the word "the," T has no color for me, H has no color for me, but E is orange. So it kind of all blends together into a reddish, pinkish, orange word. But on the other hand, words like flower, the L is sort of whitish yellow, and the W is definitely brown. And so I see different colors for that one word. There's a, I guess you could say like a chain of colors for that one word.
I have no idea how to describe it. To describe it, I'd start telling you what it looks like. That sound that's going, look at this. It's silver. It's about that wide. It's got little lines all through it. And I believe it has some little holes in it also. And the line it's following is curving in on itself. Some more food here. There's a kind of taffy that we used to have when we were little that would curl. You remember that wavy, curly stripe stuff? That's what it looks like, but it's silver with holes in it and little stripes. And it starts out kind of thick, and then it sort of diffuses as it goes on toward the end of its run.
So about 150 years ago, people were very interested in synesthesia, and it sort of dropped out of the scientific consciousness for the last century. And the reason is the school of behaviorism took over, where people were interested in treating humans like black boxes, input-output devices. And you weren't allowed to talk about what it's like to be on the inside anymore. So people stopped being interested in consciousness and what it's like to actually perceive the world. And it's only in the last 20 years or so that the question has re-emerged. So synesthesia has had a real renaissance in the last couple of decades, where people want to understand what is the neural basis of perception, and how is it that some people perceive the world differently than other people? What is it like to see differently from the inside?
And I don't know when I necessarily first became aware of it, because it seems like it's always been there, but I know that I was definitely playing with it when I was 5 or 6 years old, because I remember raiding my parents' record cabinet, searching for records that I liked to listen to for the colors.
Synesthesia is an involuntary, unconscious, automatic linking of perceptions. A stimulus, in one sense, might trigger a perception in another sense.
It's just sort of always been just the way I think. It's just one has always been yellow, you know, certain letters have always been certain colors.
The days of the week are pretty, well, they're terribly consistent. Monday is red. And my mother said when I was 5 years old, no, Monday's blue Monday.
For a while, synesthesia wasn't considered a real object of scientific study, because it seemed difficult to know whether somebody was just making a claim that was unverifiable. Because if I tell you what it's like for me to see the world from the inside, it's very difficult for you to know if I'm telling the truth or if I'm just being poetic or metaphorical.
There's been a lot of skepticism as to whether synesthetes are actually making up what they say, whether it's just vivid imagination, whether they're just very poetic people or not.
we've developed ways of testing this. So, for example, the gold standard way of testing for synesthesia is by consistency. So if you tell me that your letter J is a very particular shade of powder blue, and your letter D is a particular shade of yellow, and so on, I can test you on that and have you identify out of a palette of colors exactly the shade that best matches every one of your letters and numbers. Then I can test you 2 years later. If you're just being poetic or metaphorical and making something up, then you can't capture those colors again. But if you're really synesthetic, then you'll be able to pick exactly those colors out years later without any prompting that you're going to be retested.
These types of tests have also been done with like my types of synesthesia, matching musical instruments with color. It's been done with various phonemes and sounds, a bunch of other types of synesthesia. We're currently trying to develop a whole series of consistency tests for as many types of different synesthesia as is practical to test this way.
My mother, when I was a teenager, I said to her, how come William tastes like fried onions? And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, William tastes like fried onions. And she said, no, it doesn't. She said, anything else like that? And I said, yeah, Diane is dates. And she said, where'd you get that? And I said, well, it tastes like dates. Can't you taste it? And she said, have you got any more? And I said, yeah. So she wrote down a whole list. And then she put it away. And she thought, I'll catch her. I'll try again in a month and see. So she came back with a list. And I said the same thing. Gee, Mom, that's what it tastes like. Can't you taste it?
We've developed many tests where we can actually see what's happening from the level of the genetics to the level of what's happening in the neural activity to verify that synesthesia is a real thing. It's a genuine phenomenon, and people who have it are actually experiencing the world differently than you and I. So when they hear music, for example, they might actually perceive colors, and that's measurable. And we can see with brain scanning that the areas of your brain that care about color become active.
Oh, this is different. Okay. Here, one of the percussions, which is a very dark, almost black. You've got a bass here, which is a nice dark purple, laying way down, right on my feet. Sort of this band of purple. A high instrument there. Very interesting sort of combination of blue and pink. Right about here. All this again, so for the stuff here, about hand's length away, it's about this far away. You got this faint, undulating strip of blue and pink. Other instruments coming on in the background. Oh goodness, that's nice. All right, very strange field. It's got a background field. And the background is almost like a sheet of like mother of pearl. Almost like a whole great big large sheet of mother of pearl with the waves of pink and blue, green, and such. Sort of that everything else is playing upon that sheet there. Now it's gone. So with it gone, then the background is a sort of a very light pale blue.
We don't hear with just our ears alone. We don't smell just with our noses. We don't taste just with our tongues.
Hey, wait a minute, Doc. After 20 years behind this camera, you're not going to tell me I don't see with my eyes, are you?
No, in a strict sense, you don't, Hal. Your eyes, like your other sense organs, simply receive impressions from the outside and send them on to the brain. The senses are all different. The signals are all alike.
Yeah, but then how could the brain know which sense is sending the message?
Well, you've just asked the big question. That brings us up to the brain. It's the areas in the brain, the specific areas where the signals end up, that tell us whether you're touching, seeing, hearing, tasting, or smelling.
This back portion of your brain is almost entirely devoted to vision, and there's a particular area of the brain that cares in particular about color. The part of your brain that would be sticking out here cares about language and words and letters, and somehow in a synesthetic brain these areas are connecting to these areas so that words and letters will trigger a color experience.
I have graphene color synesthesia, and so basically I associate most letters and all numbers with some sort of color. 1 alone by itself is yellow, but 4 is also yellow, but it's a more golden yellow. Some of the differences are very, very subtle, but they're definitely distinct differences in my mind.
The colors that are associated with numbers, some of those colors I do not like. The number 8 is kind of a sick golden brown tinge with chartreuse kind of color. It's pretty nasty. Numerals have personalities, and some of them have colors too. Actually, most of them do. The primary numbers, and if I write a number twice, the personality might vary just a little bit depending on how it's written. And before I knew that there was a name for this, I assumed that other people would notice this too. So if I were addressing, say, a job application and wrote the zip code and the digits had kind of a bad attitude or something, I would write it again because I didn't want to make a bad first impression. Never occurred to me that nobody else would give a rip, because I really thought that if I do it, then everybody does it. But I waste a lot less envelopes these days.
Synesthetic perceptions can be unpleasant every once in a while. But then again, so could your sense of smell. If you're able to smell something, you probably have experienced really pleasant odors like fresh baked cookies, your favorite home-cooked meal, your favorite perfume, and you've also experienced very unpleasant odors, such as a filthy public restroom, or vomit, or manure. Right? Now, you've experienced extremely unpleasant odors. Do you want to permanently lose your sense of smell?
Some unpleasant things, it's good if you can see them or experience them so you know they're there. Same as, if I were walking down the street and in a very typical visual sense saw a man coming at me with a knife, it'd be an unpleasant experience, but it's good that I saw him.
I'm used to it. I don't know what I'd do without it. And I hear Barbara, for instance, that's coconut. And I like the taste of coconut. Now, it doesn't make me full. It gives me a craving for that particular thing sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't.
I definitely like having the color associations. It's an interesting thing to talk about, and it's kind of neat to have. And actually, once I realized that I could actually use colors to help me remember number sequences and things like that, that was actually kind of useful. Now I get a phone number, and if I'm having a hard time remembering it, I just kind of remember a couple of colors.
And I wish I could paint because it's beautiful. I sing, and when I'm singing, one way I monitor whether I'm on pitch is that I see the note. And if that note doesn't have the right texture, I'll know that it isn't quite right. So when I'm singing, I see the shape and texture of that note in my mind's eye, and it helps me to fine-tune.
Synesthesia is not a disease. It's not a disorder. It's not something that is in any way a symptom of some other major problem. It's not something that you need to get rid of. It's an alternate way of perceiving the world.
For some synesthetes, their sense of taste is connected in their brain to their sense of color or texture or shape. So, for example, they might put something in their mouth, and that will trigger the parts of their brain that are involved in color perception. and also often with location.
Okay, what I have here is grilled chicken, vanilla ice cream, and orange sauce. All of these different foods produce different shades of blue for me. So chicken makes blue, ice cream makes blue, vanilla makes blue, orange makes blue, but they're all subtly different shades. So if we take this and combine it together, get a bit of it here. I'm got in front of me, right about here. It's moving from a little bit left to about here, field about this wide. And very interesting. You get subtly different shades of blue. I'm getting the chicken is a baby blue here. The ice cream is just a little bit paler and it's coming on up the sides a bit. The orange is about here. It's a very faint baby blue, but it has a different type of texture. It's like it's made out of a different material. It's not my favorite thing to eat for the flavor, although I like the flavor. I think the flavor is okay, but if I eat this at all, I'm mainly eating it for the colors, which are phenomenal.
So for years I've been trying to understand, I'm not a synesthete, I've been trying to understand what it's like to have synesthesia. And the closest sort of analogy, which I think works, is something like this. If I were to show you a photograph of Barack Obama, you would immediately think Barack Obama. Even though those words aren't written anywhere there, just seeing his face, you would immediately think those words. An important thing to understand about synesthesia is it's not the same as a hallucination. So when a synesthete sees the letter T and experiences some sort of yellow in his mind's eye, it's not the same as a hallucination. He knows that the T is in fact in black ink and that there's not yellow out there. So it's not the sort of thing that would cause a car accident, and it's not the type of thing that would count as a hallucination or something one would have to worry about. Even though there's a location, it's not actually interfering with their ability to see in that part of space. So in the same way, you could picture a giant orange pumpkin sitting right in front of you, but that doesn't prevent you from seeing through that and past that. Nonetheless, you could say it's orange and it's right here in space. That's sort of what it's like to be synesthetic. It's not blocking something else out like a hallucination, but instead it exists in essentially a parallel space to the one you have.
Field of green, it's about this big. It's kind of a blob. Its shape isn't defined. Sort of an oily type of color. The milk in the coffee is creating little, small, light blue, like sky blue streaks running on through it, sort of like a sheen. Get this going on in here. Oh yeah. Get them together. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's strong. What I've got in front of me is the background of the oily green liquid, and coming through from the jalapeno are all these small, tiny, like cut gemstones, little small cut rubies or maybe sapphires, and small little blue gemstones, like rubies and garnets, sapphires, tiny things sparkling in the green oil. It sounds very odd, but it really looks beautiful, especially the way the blue shines through with the green.
So the most popular theory to explain synesthesia is that in different areas of the brain, you actually have cross-wiring. You have more wiring in a synesthetic brain that causes these areas to talk to each other more. I don't favor that theory. Instead, I favor a second hypothesis, which is that the amount of wiring is the same in everybody's brain. Instead, what's different is there's a slight difference in the balance of excitation and inhibition, such that activity here will cause activity here, because there's not enough inhibition of that activity. The reason I favor the hypothesis that the wiring is the same in everybody is because non-synesthetes can experience synesthesia. So for example, when people take drugs like LSD or DMT, they'll experience synesthesia. Also, many non-synesthetes, when they're very fatigued, right when they're falling asleep, somebody might slam a door and they'll see colors. So this implies that everybody is capable of a synesthetic experience. Also, for synesthetes, the amount of their experience waxes and wanes. So for example, when they are drunk with alcohol, or they're very tired, or they're very emotional or stressed out, their synesthesia tends to be much richer and more intense. And in other cases, when they're on certain drugs like antidepressants, their synesthetic experience goes down. And this has the feeling of something that is involved in inhibition in the brain rather than wiring, because there's no reason to expect that your wiring would change based on emotion and fatigue and so on.
All humans have maybe a recent evolutionary modification of the human brain, but a modification that allows us to put together distinct things to create metaphors and abstract ideas. So, in looking at synesthesia, we may be looking at sort of a hardcore, heavy-duty example of what is more broad and loose and general in all people.
In a synesthetic brain, areas of the brain are cross-talking more than normal. So what happens in the brain of somebody who's not synesthetic if they have more crosstalk than normal in other areas? So for example, if sound and color are connected, then you'll be a sound-color synesthete, and we'll find you in my laboratory. But what if you have other areas of your brain connected that don't have to do with perception? Then you won't come to my lab, you won't be called a synesthete, but nonetheless you have too much crosstalk going on in the brain. So who are those people? Are those the geniuses? Are those the madmen? We don't really know. One hypothesis is that that might be the neural basis of creativity and of metaphor. So the idea is that creativity and metaphor involve binding very different domains and seeing similarities between them. Say that I tell you that I've just returned from Papua New Guinea and I found a tribe there that had two shapes. One of the shapes was jagged and the other one was very smooth. And I tell you that the tribe calls one of those shapes Kiki and the other one they call Booba. And the question is, which word goes with which shape? Most people will say that the Kiki goes with the jagged shape and the Booba goes with the smooth shape. Now, there's no reason this would have to be true, but almost everybody will make that guess. This is an example where there may be synesthetic correspondences in normal brains, but we're normally not aware of these unless we tease them out with examples like this.
Accepting reality. On this side of the fence, where the grass is always browner, where a blade of grass is just that, nothing more, and the fence and the people, in the here and now that binds us, that blinds us to the dance of our own shadows, a tree is always a tree, a stone always a stone. But fence walkers know that even stones can cry out if needed, and sometimes, catwalking at night, they see a glimpse at a time, out of time, in the golden fog that descends sometimes, that a stone or a tree could be almost anything. Every synesthete has his or her own connections there, and they don't always correspond to another one. I think the fact that they have that type of experience at all may be what is of value to, say, a non-synesthetic reader.
We all accept the reality that's presented to us. So I see the world in a particular way, and if I were to tell you that the way you see the world is actually exactly upside down from the way I see the world, it doesn't matter, because we both accept and love the realities that we have, and as long as we can both operate in the outside world in agreement, then it doesn't matter.
I think when we share those types of experiences that may help expand the reader's world a little bit, so that if they do tend to think in those terms and maybe haven't really acknowledged that, it gives them permission to expand their experience, to expand their perception somewhat. So it doesn't matter if my Tuesday is blue, green, or yellow. The fact that it's anything may or may not mean something to someone else, but if it does, it doesn't matter if his is orange or purple.
Everybody knows from their freshman year in college, sitting around in the dorm room, that there's a possibility that the way you see the color red and the way I see the color red might be different. Well, it turns out the problem goes far deeper than that. It's worse than that. What I call vision and what you call vision might be completely different. And it doesn't matter as long as we can both agree in the outside world.
For someone who doesn't have those experiences, it still might broaden their view of what is possible in experience.
So it turns out what we learned from synesthesia is that some people perceive reality in a different way than the rest of us. And this is probably true in many different ways that we haven't even discovered yet. Synesthesia just happens to be a very good inroad into understanding how this works and what's different about some people's brains that causes them to have a different reality.